Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Strange Saturday Super Show. And we certainly have a book that I think lives up to that name today, Katie.
Yes, we have a number of adjectives that we look for when it comes to a Strange Saturday Super Show book, and I think this fits a good few of them.
Yeah. So we are going to be talking about Madman, created by Michael Allred. We'll be talking about mainly the original series, but we did also read the For the Record story from, why can't I remember what that was inside of? It was in a, anthology type book. So credits, of course, Michael Allred, writer, illustrator. We also have inks by Bernie Muralt for the Record, colors by Laura Allred, and letters by Laura Allred. And for the original miniseries, which was originally black and white, I believe, we have in the library edition that we read it from, we have colors by Han Allred and letters, once again, by Laura Allred. In case you're unfamiliar with Mike Allred, done a lot of Batman 66 comics, worked on the series iZombie and Ecstatics, as well as a few other sorted, big name Marvel and DC books. But let me get into what the book is actually about. We follow Frank Einstein, fantastic pun, who is a Frankenstein's monster-esque.
Born of the Doctor's love of Frank Sinatra and Albert Einstein.
Yes, funnily enough, that doesn't seem to be I think I don't think the first appearance is actually in continuity with everything else, because if you notice, the first appearance is a little bit different because he has his memories and his name was actually Frank Einstein compared to it, the new origin for the name in the original.
They give it a fancy little retcon.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so we follow Frank Einstein, who is a Frankenstein's monster. He's saved by this doctor. What?
He's kind of a Frankenstein's monster. It's
he
very
essentially
loose,
is. He's like,
but we love it.
He's brought back to life essentially, and now he is a little bit odd looking in the sense that he is gray and has a single scar, and that makes him, horribly disfigured.
Here, we'll get to it, because he's so hot still. He is objectively, he looks no different than any of the normal characters.
That's why I said he's evil characters with a scar.
And he's like, no, I'm
a single little scar. But I do think we'll get into it, but I do think that's somewhat part of it, because a lot of it is within the internality self-view stuff. Anyway, we'll get there. So this guy named Boyfard is kind of the guy who saved him and brought him back, and this man is killed by a mob boss dude called Monstart. So Katie hates my pronunciation of that, so I apologize.
There's no R.
Yeah. There's no R. I'm sorry. Don't act like you've never pronounced things weirdly in some of these episodes.
I've never pronounced things weirdly.
Yeah. In any case, so basically the big quest that he goes on is he has to find Dr. Flem, because he can bring Boyfard back to life, because he has frozen Boyfard. And essentially each issue we kind of get a different little adventure that also progresses the main story. So the first one is he comes into this town, and there's this guy named Randolph, who is I should mention Frank Einstein can touch people's hands and see their thoughts and their futures and everything. So this is how he typically learns how things are going on. So he shakes the mayor's hand, and he finds out that this mayor is the fake mayor, while the real mayor is out of town, and the fake mayor has murdered his wife and is planning to murder.
He's the acting mayor, so he's supposed to be mayor right now.
He is the acting mayor. Because apparently you appoint a new mayor when the mayor's out of town. Interestingly.
Kind of. I feel like that's kind of a thing, the assistant mayor.
No, it's not! No!
I know that you have much more experience with local government, but they put someone in charge.
No, they don't! You don't need an acting mayor if the mayor's gone for 2 weeks. There's not time-sensitive mayoring. He's not the police
chief. There certainly could be time-sensitive mayoral duties, We saw at the end.
Uh,
Escape park needed to be approved.
yeah, you're right. You're right. I don't think that's really time sensitive, but okay.
In
Anyway,
any case, this
so
man is the acting mayor
yeah, so
and wants to be a real mayor.
this is basically this is like the simplest of the stories, I think. Frank Einstein, basically stops the acting mayor. I'll stop saying fake mayor because it bothers Katie. He stops the acting mayor from killing the real mayor, and then kind of goes on with his business. And then we get to finally meeting Dr. Flem, who is essentially experimenting with cloning, and he's created these wild, like, diseased clones that are like children emotionally. That's how they explain it. Okay, they are more like
physically
rabid beasts.
adult clones.
Yes,
but they're like
emotionally
their
like
brains aren't figured
Anyway,
out.
so they have this disease, and Dr. Flem himself has gotten the disease because one bit him, and so he has Frank Einstein decapitate him, put his head in a fishbowl, and then kind of go after these clones. Eventually, they get one, and they try a cure on it, which fails. They get another one, and they kind of cure him for a time, but then his head gets diseased, so he decapitates himself so that the real doctor can use his body. We go, sew them up. Boom. Now we're back. We bring back Boyfard, and it's on to like taking on the mob boss who has captured a love interest who's very minorly involved in the story for the most part, named Joe, for Frank Einstein, and basically Frank Einstein ends up kind of saving her and saving the day. That's the general gist of it. There's also very important notebooks with like the secret to prolonging life and bringing people back from the dead, which is like a big theme. Like that's what Mondstadt wants, and that's what Frank Einstein's trying to destroy or get back. So there's kind of the overarching plot. I want to say one thing before I'm going to throw it to you to kind of get your thoughts, because I just think it's topical, because we talked about pacing on this week's episode, and I just want to say, like, I think we've talked about this before, where we both really dislike 3-issue miniseries typically. I felt like this was fantastically paced and structured. Like, I thought it was.
I would like to point out.
Yeah.
These are oversized issues, which I
yes,
think
they
is
are 48
really
pages,
big factor.
Yes, absolutely. But what I want to say about it is, like, each issue is its own story, but it is also like a chunk of the larger story, and it's just done in such a good way that makes me feel satisfied after each issue. But they're also such a good cohesive story, and not unlike the more modern way of like either it's just a part of a larger story, or like here are the breadcrumbs that will eventually equal a bigger story. Like, it is just simultaneously individual stories that are part of a larger story, which just makes me like really happy and enthused about like the way that the comic book medium was used here. So yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I want to say that before I threw it to you.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that part of the problem with finding stuff like that in modern comics is that there's not a lot of people don't traditionally do that anymore. In the same way that we've talked about before, there's not a lot of like essentially monster of the week style comics the way that there used to be, or even like little two-part.
But the nice thing about this is it doesn't even feel like it's not even like trying to be monster of the week. It's just it's simultaneously doing like modern comics and old school comics, where it is a larger story and individual stories, which is just like, I think, what very difficult to pull off, but makes me very happy that this did.
And I think part of the reason that it pulls it off so well, to kind of segue us into just our discussion of the book, is because it does lean itself very hard into the kind of more like grounded absurdity, which is a bit of an oxymoron to say, but because
it's absurd,
it is absurd, and because with each issue of it, they're tackling some new absurd thing. I think that they're able to do those contained stories. Like, I would say that they worked incredibly well on both counts as well, but it's a decidedly different structure than we're used to seeing with a lot of stories, where it is very
100%.
much like you get a piece of information or something, and then you move on, and it's like a whole new arc going on with it, essentially. Like, the things that I think were made into issues of this are things that would be like full arcs of books now, because you don't see
Agreed.
that kind of small scale storytelling that often
Yeah.
anymore. And I think that
No,
that's super well
that's very well
done.
put. Yeah, I agree with you. Um, I enjoyed this quite a bit. I don't know if you did as
Oh yeah.
well. I thought this was so much fun. I also just love Mike Allred's artwork. Like, it is real good at making use of the comic book medium. Like, I want to point to and some one of the few things I knew about this coming in was I knew the origin, like kind of like that, page that is the origin, and I knew that it was redone from the there's two different versions of it. There's the one from the for the record story, and then he redraws it for the
Issue
miniseries.
3.
Yeah. And one, it's just a phenomenal 2 pages in both. Actually, it might only be 1 page in the redone version. I can't remember if it was shortened. It's phenomenal. But then also the way that it was seeing it in because I think it's only 2 years apart or something from the same artist, but him doing it differently is really, really cool. And I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
No, it's super rad. It's not my favorite style personally, but it's very distinct feeling, and I think
Yeah.
that it's done with a lot of it's done with a lot of purpose. Like, you can tell how much of the design choices are done with incredible. I mean, to grab just a random thing, for the most part, not a book that demands much when we looked at Battle Pope, it's okay, women not treated well, whatever. We have 2 female characters here who end up with weirdly destroyed garments, and it's clearly super thought out. He's not just drawing stock images of things. A lot of the characters have really odd design choices that are definitely on purpose and definitely serving a purpose, and they're super fun. And I think that's something that is really easy to find with things where, as always, we gotta gush over writer artists where you have a writer artist, because they know what they want to convey about these characters, and they're able to do so with various different types of language, written and visual. And I
Yeah.
feel like we get that a lot with Frank's design as well, which I would love to bank on, because it's a weird
Yeah.
fucking design. Do you want to describe?
I feel
the
like
suit?
this is. It feels like but I just want to hit on something. This feels so similar to the Max in one way to me,
I
which
was
is it
gonna
feels like
pull
a
the Max
book
up as our
that
comparison.
wouldn't have been a superhero story if it wasn't the early 90s. It feels like the early 90s, it's a comic book, gotta put them in a costume. You can even look at that original book when he was an anthology character, he didn't have a superhero suit. And then the second that we get to the miniseries, because probably much easier to get it green lighted when you slap them in a superhero suit. And then
when you
we
can
get a
give
very
them a
kind of
logo.
yeah. We get a very kind of haphazard origin that I think is quite fun for why he wears the suit. And it's worked in very well to the book, but it also isn't just compared to the Max, it's not just accepted that he's wearing this. It is constantly called out by everyone that this is fucking weird that he wears this suit. But yeah, it is a very it's not quite white because it's that off-white. So it's an off-white, just stock tights type outfit with a weird kind of sort of belt sometimes. I think the belt's always there, but it's just not always drawn. But there's kind of this tattery belt.
He
He's got
sometimes
blue
has a
boots.
fanny pack.
Yeah. And then he's got just a black exclamation point on his chest that I do think eventually becomes red, because I think the iconic Madman costume is with a red lightning bolt.
Yeah.
So I think it becomes
I would
red.
think that if they were coloring previously black and white things, might be difficult to change that.
Yeah, it was probably just already. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that is the outfit. it's wild. But
it's wild, and I love the origin that they come up with for it. Frank has lost his memories in this accident, which I want to touch on as our next little point.
Yeah.
And apparently one of the first signs he had of like getting his memories back was a memory of his father bringing him comic books that starred this superhero. And so he like adjusted his lab coat to have it going on. And he like wears the mask so that he feels better about himself, which we'll also jump to because it comes up weirdly a lot. Self-esteem in this book.
And existentialism.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I want to touch on, before we get to the more thematic things, another kind of mechanical thing. I am not normally a big fan of amnesia plot lines, but I feel like this one works really, really well. I do hate those. How do you normally feel about amnesia? Are you pretty...
I hate it. I typically hate it with an established character. Like, I don't mind if we're jumping in with a character and it's like, I'm like this. Like, it's a new character, so the amnesia plotline is kind of cool because it keeps us from knowing their origin when they don't know their origin. When I'm going to pull out... I may have literally brought this up when we talked about this on the podcast before, but I'll bring up Starfire and Titans, where it's just, we know the character, we know what's going on, stop it. It's obnoxious, it's annoying, just stop it. And I feel like it happens a lot with, like, characters established in, like, a new arc or something. And it's like, they've forgotten everything. And it's like, I don't
or
like
Rick
that.
Grayson.
That's poor. Don't even. That shouldn't even be considered an amnesia plotline because that's just so weird. It's like, what if they got amnesia and then, like, just turned into a different person, essentially? You know?
Okay, because I never have a platform on which to talk about this, and we're never going to talk about Rick Grayson on the pod again, I would like to point out that it's so squandered, because if it was a very brief plot line, I think that the plot of... Because if you remember, it's like Nightwing Annual 5 or something, the one where they're about to bring him back to being Dick, they establish that
I didn't keep reading that long to get there.
That's so fair.
I gave up so early in the Rick arc, and I've never actually gotten back on Nightwing since.
You know what? We'll play catch up. Maybe for
literally
the
have never picked up
starting. What a good place to jump in.
Yeah, we should. But yeah, no, that's because, like,
but it's revealed.
We have never been able to talk about Nightwing together because we both stopped reading with around the Rick time. But you jumped back on, and I just never did.
I did. But they revealed that the neurosurgeon who had worked on Dick and was like the one he was checking in with was like being paid. It might have been the Joker. It might have been someone else. It's been a while, and I pretty much just amnesia'd myself of all the Rick stuff. But she was like perpetuating the amnesia and pushing him away from his family. And if that was like a one volume thing, that would be really cool. But no, they ruined it. And I think it had something to do with Doomsday Clock. Didn't Doomsday Clock fuck up a bunch of publication schedules?
God, yes. Doomsday Clock was a nightmare.
And I think that's part of the reason that we had Dick for...
We're supposed to be talking about Madman, and you pulled out Doomsday Clock and Rick Grayson. Like, why are you making this such a down episode?
They're connected!
Talking about Madman, which is so fun.
But Madman, which does its amnesia plot so well, and I think, you're right, it's because it's a new character, so there's not, like, a whole lot of dramatic irony for us, where we're like, oh, we know that this means something. And two, I think because... he is motivated by getting his memories back, but because that getting his memories back is directly tied to bringing Dr. Boyford back from the dead, the motivation is really bringing Dr. Boyford back from the dead. Yeah. So it works out in a much more interesting plot than this vague, I need to find out who I am. It's like we have a concrete goal, and when we bring him back, we don't get a whole lot of backstory for Frank because Boyford doesn't know it, but that is also kind of like a satisfying thing to get. It's
that's
like, there's more.
Yeah. The interesting thing is we get backstory for Frank. We don't get backstory for who he really is. Like, we find out now that he is now Frank Einstein, and this is who he has been for at least a little bit, but we get nothing of the before that. So there's like two different amnesia things, which sounds obnoxious, but is so good in the way that it is delivered.
It works out so well. And I will say, when we when I got to the point where he was like, yeah, and then because the whole thing is that he becomes Frank Einstein, and then because he's like grappling with mental health issues, he like rips his like Frankenstein metal neck thingies out
Bolts, which are like
early,
how he gets
and that like
information and
short
stuff.
circuits his brain, so he regresses and essentially loses his memories. I was very against that when I like read it on the page, but then as it launches into the explanation, it becomes like so forgivable, which is a weird word to use because it's not like an egregious sin, but it works within the plot, and I think that's why the amnesia stuff works so well here, because it's all like, it's not that Frank wants to know who he is and then learns that he's from Tamaran and his name is Starfire. It's that he wants to know who he is, and we see him grappling with like you said, a lot of weird existentialism, like we mentioned, a lot of weird self-esteem stuff. So we're getting such good information on like who he is before he learns who he is. And that doesn't change what we've learned about him at all.
Yes. Fully agree, because I feel like I don't know where Madman goes from here, but I know there's a lot more Madman content. So I'm assuming at some point you probably find out who he was, but my feeling would be that who he was isn't really who he is, if that makes sense.
I would agree, but I don't know for sure that it would dive into that, because I think that a big thing... I think that a big thing with it very much could be, because again, I also have not read beyond what we read today. It could be like, it doesn't matter who he was because this is who he is now. I feel like that rides that's well with their kind of self-esteem plot.
No, that definitely fits kind of the vibe that's going for. So I could fully see that. But yeah, I feel like you know, there's so much when you get a wild book that's also so well made. It's so hard to like pick things to talk about because there's so much.
The Max all over again.
Yeah, it really is. So I want to touch on something kind of that you talked about there, where it's like you read that on the page and went, I don't know how I feel about that. But then you kind of come to terms with it. So I feel like so much of this book for me was like every now and then there was something that like typically would annoy me in most series. But like maybe it's just because it feels like there's such a clear creative direction for this book. Like it feels like everything's very intentional, and like Mike Allred knows what he's trying to accomplish and where he's going so clearly that I think I was just willing to accept a lot more than I am with other books that maybe don't feel like they quite know what they're doing. Because it was always kind of like, oh, okay, well this was something like when we get like the zombified wife and mare that like pull the other mare into the water, and it's like, I get we're in Supernatural, but that's not really anything that's been established here that is like a thing that can happen. But and I had that moment immediately, but then I kind of just moved on and went, no, okay, you know what? Like, that's fine. Like, it works, and like, it's what he wanted to do, and it's kind of thematically relevant, even if logically it doesn't work. So, like, okay, I can accept that. I think there were a couple other spots where I had a similar thing of like, I don't know about that, but okay, yeah, no, I can accept it because I'm enjoying the ride, and I feel like it fits the ride.
And let me speak to that for a second, because it comes to one of my favorite things as a fan and one of my least favorite things as a writer. I think it's very fun to speculate about in-world logic about things.
Yeah.
Like, we had a long-ass conversation about the literal mechanics of vampirism, because I think that's a fun thing to be like, oh, do you think they have holes in their fangs? Does it go to their bloodstream or their digestive tract? It's fun things to be like, oh, we're goofy little fans having a goofy time. I feel like because people enjoy doing that type of logic game world building stuff so much of the content that we have in like modern media needs to have that logic built into it. There like is a right answer for these things, and I think that's something that wasn't as big a concern, way back when in the 90s. And
that's true.
It made for stories that didn't necessarily have like those rules happening within them, but did have that like you're saying, that kind of thematic toning, supernatural vibing, that it just works.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I'm usually a big stickler for internal logic because like I don't mind if you break our rules, but I don't like you to break your own rules. You know, like I feel like it's important that
Yeah,
there's
no.
consistency and stuff like that because otherwise
Mhm.
I feel like you lose a lot of like stakes and stuff. Like I feel like it's very important to have some sort of internal logic consistency because it allows you to build stakes and stuff like that. But that being said, there are certain books and certain things that don't quite because Madman's not really about that. You know, like I never
Yeah.
felt like I was supposed to be like worried about Frank or even about Boyhart or even about Joe. Like it never felt like that was the story so much as it was about like Frank's internal struggle and like
Mhm.
who he was and like what he was. And you know, that
I
plays
mean,
into the
come on, how are you gonna
existentialism that is
remove
so weird in
stakes
this book.
quicker?
But so
How are you gonna remove
good.
stakes quicker than killing your main character before the story even starts? Like,
No,
death is
that's
not
fair.
an obstacle
I mean,
for
it's an
any of the
obstacle, but
characters.
it's a very overcomable obstacle in this world.
Yes.
Like we
Yeah.
have a guy decapitated who's brought back. Like everybody come, almost everybody comes back. Literally, the threat to Joe at the end of this isn't I'm gonna kill her so that she's dead. It's I'm gonna kill her so you have to bring her back to life and show me how to do that, which is
Yeah.
such a cool way to do that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, like the role of death in this is so interesting because then it goes into stuff like the existentialism of like he even like it's so funny because he says one of like my favorite lines to say is a joke, but he's kind of dead serious. And I think I've said this to you before, but he says something along the lines of like I've never died so far, and so until I die, I won't believe that I will die. And that's something that I love to throw out as a joke of like, oh, I've never died before, so obviously I will never die. But it's so like deadpan serious in this, and there's a lot of really cool existentialism that I think is usually something that's so obnoxious in comics because it's not well done,
Mhm.
but it feels so natural in the places that it's put in this book. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that being a like recurring theme in this.
No, and I think such a big part of why it lands so well is because one, you have a character who's like genuinely grappling with this as someone who is like displaced in his own mortality. And two, it's not super like it's a funny book. Like it's meant
Oh
to be
yeah.
funny in a great many places. His go-to weapon is a yo-yo filled with lead. Like it's incredibly silly, and I think part of that it allows you to have him have these more kind of serious moments. Like it's I don't remember if it must be issue 1 where he falls asleep in the forest and he's like talking to God because he had like could remember seeing God before, the lever was pulled and he was brought back to life. And it's something
Yeah.
that I think could have been really like I don't want to say preachy because I don't really mean preachy, but it could have been very like stereotypical, maybe, or like melodramatic. But because it's flanked by him being kicked off of a bus for not be for only having $12 in his
Yeah.
pocket, and then on the other side of it getting into like a ridiculous fight where a zombie tries to knock him off a ladder or something. It works so well
That's
because
later,
it's
I
not
think.
like that might be later, yeah.
That's
Well,
an issue
oh,
too.
the zombie comes and like touches him though,
Yeah, yeah.
because he
The
falls
ladder's
asleep
an
and then he
issue
jerks
too.
awake.
Yes,
The
yes.
ladder's an
I do
issue,
think
yeah.
I think the zombie touching him is actually after this though. I think it's right after the god thing.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm
If I'm
saying. Is
correct.
that on either
Oh yeah.
side of it, it's got
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
yes. You are correct.
weird
You are correct. I'm sorry.
things. Yeah,
You are
yeah, yeah.
correct. Yeah. And then like just to
And I
because
think
you
that
touched on the
helps
scene,
it not be
it's
so
so
melodramatic.
yeah. It has like such a good existential like something that sounds like it belongs in Watchmen instead of in this, which
Hmm.
is because I found the page out. He goes, "Is God watching me now? I wonder when our son will die. Will God pick up and watch someone else?"
Right?
Like,
Like, what the fuck,
holy
Mike?
shit, that's a good line. Like, I'm sorry. I dream of writing things that like profound and interesting, and it's in the middle of this wacky thing where the main guy fights with a goddamn yo-yo.
And I think that's really the beauty of it because, you can have an edgy existentialist character, but a lot of times when you try to write edgy existentialist characters, they're gonna come off like moody teenagers. But no, it works so well here. And it feels so profound.
Yeah,
Coming
I
from
agree.
him.
The funny thing is, I feel like he feels so much like that edgy teenager in the original anthology story. Like, there's such an interesting, like, I think the anthology story is really, really well done for an anthology story. But I think if you transported that exact version of the character into his own series, I don't think it would work very well, because he's kind of vindictive. You know, he's like, I want to get revenge on these people. He doesn't quite end up doing it in the way, and that's kind of the nice thing at the end of the story, is he does it kind of in a different way that's really cool. But I think if you put him in his own miniseries, I don't think it would work across a larger story. So instead, we get this like redone version who's more kind of childlike in like the sense of wonder and curiosity, and a little bit less jaded. And maybe that's because he doesn't have his memory. So like the transport is the version of a character like this who remembers who he was before and is bitter about it, versus the one who doesn't remember what he was before and is only like filled with curiosity. So I think that just the transport of like the way that this character worked in an anthology and the way he worked in a miniseries, and Mike Allred having the sight to like treat the character with the same origin and the same rough story so differently because of what the different like same medium, but this different like structures needed,
formats,
is so interesting. Formats, thank you, that's the word I was looking for. Is so interesting.
And so, like you said, so like 200-yard sight, like being able to understand that your story as it sits in this anthology is not something that, as it sits in the anthology, would be able to carry a story. Because you probably didn't write it to do so. Like, if we want a detour to talk about the anthology story, I actually really liked it as it was there. It's real good. So Frank has been resurrected as this Frank Einstein character, and he had ordered a record from a record store. And now that he's like all Frankenstein, they're treating him differently and not giving him his record. And we get this sequence, where he fantasizes about how to like get revenge on them, where he's like, oh, I will show them these horrifying things, and then, oh no, you know what they deserve is to see themselves being disfigured like I am. And then instead he decides to use his power to like influence people's perception, to grab a girl so he looks like a hot dude, and she gives him the record. And he's like, see, that's what you should actually do. And it's such a good twist. And it kind of does an amazing job of selling the Frankenstein of it all, if I may be so bold. Like, being, oh, people perceive him as this giant, terrible creature. All he wants is to engage in art, and it's not that he is going to give into that monster side of him to engage in his art, because that would then, make it impossible for him to. So he essentially resolves things peacefully. It's like, okay, we are truly getting like real Frankenstein's monster here. And it's great.
No, I think you kind of nailed it there. Like, it is just this really nice little subversion, and I feel like this is something, I don't know if I've said it on the pod, but I say a lot, is I think one of the best ways to leave a lasting impact from an anthology story is a twist ending. And like, this isn't a huge twist ending or anything, but it's still that like twist ending, and I think that's just, it leaves you thinking about an anthology story when they kind of change something up on you at the end. So yeah, I thought it was a fantastically well done anthology story. Like I said, I don't think the character could have survived being in a larger format, so I'm glad we got the change, because all in all, I ended up really enjoying the way that the way that the series went, despite it being so different than the anthology, that I also really enjoyed. So it's really interesting to see the same character.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we read both.
Me too. Because I had forgotten about that, and then like again, like I told you, like the one thing I kind of remembered, because I had watched a Comic Tropes video about Mike Allred. So like one of the few things I remembered was that there was the origin, in the OG story, and then it was redone for the miniseries. And so when I then opened up the library edition, because I couldn't find the original miniseries anywhere else, and I saw the like thing at the beginning, I was like, oh no, we got to read that, because like it's the first thing, and that's probably important. Nice. But yeah, I don't know, is there anything else you want to touch on here in terms of the miniseries or in terms of Madman in general?
For the miniseries, what I will say is one thing that it worked, but it wasn't my favorite thing, was there was a flirting with this concept of Frank, like, losing control. Like, he eats a man's eyeball at one point.
Yes. Very
Pretty
early
much
on,
every time that
actually.
he kills someone, right? Pretty much every time that he kills someone, he, like, goes very over the top. It's like, oh no, I done lost control again. And I feel like maybe that's something that comes up more later, and maybe that's them trying to feed into, like, the he has to overcome the monster within vibe or something. But it wasn't my favorite thing to come up.
It's a little
Like, him
detached.
killing
It doesn't
people
feel like
violently
it
was
quite
fine.
feeds into, yeah. It feels like it doesn't quite
Mhm.
feed into like what they're doing with the character besides that. Like you said, like maybe it's like that idea of the monster thing, but I agree. To me, it felt very like it didn't quite jive with what they were doing with the character.
Yeah.
It's just Mike Allred. Obviously, we have colors and letter, but it's for the most part just Mike Allred. I'm so used to saying they in
But
comics because
same, yeah. As a final thing to touch on, just because I feel like it was such a big theme throughout,
yeah,
there's like I don't want to call it like a pedestrian theme, but a kind of like basic vibe of self-esteem. Like, you should have better self-esteem. Don't feel bad about who you are. How'd you feel about all that going on? Like, what do you think the arc of that was for us?
I think in a way that's kind of Joe's role in the book, which
Mm-hmm.
is like Joe's role's a little bit weird in the book, but I think she's there to basically give us at the end like, oh, like normal people don't necessarily think that he's this like ugly monster if he's not in his weird
Mm-hmm.
creepy outfit, because like you said, like he does just kind of look like a normal lad. Like you called him hot, I said normal lad, but yeah, I think that that's kind of the vibe of it, is like a lot of it is the idea that like he is so terrified of what people will see him as that he hides himself and thus is seen worse because he's wearing
Yeah.
this weird outfit, which is a cool kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially. That
Mm-hmm.
like because he's trying to hide who he is thus treated like the monster that he is trying to hide. So it's a cool idea. And then like again, I didn't think Joe was perfectly executed or involved in this story,
She
but
just
I
didn't
do
have
think
much to
like
do.
yeah, because I think that's like the rough thing of when you are doing an amnesia plot with like a character who we didn't know before. When you have that character who's like, oh, this is from his life before. It's like, well, we don't know that life, so it's hard for you to actually intertwine that character well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like her giving him the moment of like, no, I think you're attractive. The dialogue there was a little bit rough.
It was a
The
little
only
rough.
time in the book I thought it was a little rough, but yeah, it was a little rough there. But I thought the idea of that part of it was
Mm-hmm.
was a good idea.
I will say, as a reference to something that does the amnesia but the romantic partner from before him really well, Cyborg Rebirth did that so well with
Yes.
Cyborg's girlfriend. Like, just to throw throw some compliments over towards Cyborg
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it was. Sorry, what?
Is it Sarah? Right?
Probably. I feel like Sarah's a
Like
go-to comic love interest name.
I feel like I think there's a joke about Cyborg because he's had two main love interests and they both have the same first name, and I think it's Sarah.
Well, maybe one had an H and one didn't have an H.
Which is important. It's either Sarah. I don't know why the
Hey,
two names in my head are Sarah or Chloe. Like I feel like it's one of those two.
I
I'm
don't think it
leaning
was
more towards
Chloe.
Sarah. Okay, I'm leaning more
Yeah.
towards Sarah, but like Chloe's in
I'm
there
ready
for
for
some
just
reason.
those to be completely wrong. But
They probably
frankly,
are.
who cares? But yeah, they do it really well there, and I think that it's one of the weaker parts of this one in terms of like
It is Sarah.
character. But I think it works really well in terms of like completing his arc. If we're looking at
Yes.
like kind of like, oh, this 3-issue series where he like comes into his own and finds out who he is even if he doesn't remember who he was. So I think it all thematically ties together well. Did you have anything else you wanted to bring up about the book?
Not particularly. There's some really nice art moments, but I don't know if I can if I should just run through a bunch of them. One of them is there's a really cool splash in issue 1 that's just randomly there that feels like it's almost a different art style than the rest of the book, but it looks
also
really,
there's
really good.
A Kirby original pinup for issue 3 or something.
That's so cool.
I didn't. Jack Kirby did a pinup of this character.
That's so.
Which is so rad.
I did not realize that. That's so freaking cool.
Right?
But yeah, I don't know.
I think it's really interesting because it works on, I'm not going to say a strict, but a kind of based, right?
He made him such a Chad.
I know. He looks like every Jack Kirby character. It's great.
We're literally stepping on an enemy that doesn't exist in the book too, and holding Joe in his arms in a traditional superhero pose. It's so funny.
I will say, I don't know if it feels like it was made for that issue, since it's after the fake cover of the issue. Though it could theoretically be.
Yeah.
In any case, so it works on this kind of default 6-panel grid, and it makes it really impactful when it does break from that with a splash page, or there was a fun one where there were 2 panels and then Madman climbing a wall where the other panels normally were. So it's one of those things where when you have a structured page layout, you can do fun things where you break from it. Which is refreshing, because I feel like with a lot of modern comics, we have a lot of kind of inset panels and open top panels, and so it's always fun to go back to older books and look at the more standardized layout.
It feels wild that this, especially because you say go back to old books, but if anything, this was made at the time where this would have been the weirdest. I think this is 92.
Oh yeah,
this is the time where this would be the weird of 2-page splashes of giant artwork of big bombastic scenes. This feels so antithetical to that, which is very interesting. And just all the more I think evidence that Mike Allred had such a clear creative vision with what he wanted to do with this.
Yeah. So yeah, great choice for this strange Saturday Super Show, Jaybird. Way to go.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it personally.
I love looking at the books that we choose for each other to read, and because I feel like this and the Max tied really well together. I can't say that a hack slash and My Date with Monsters really tied well together, but why not? They kind of fit similar themes.
I feel like weirdly Strange Saturday Super Show is the highest batting average of good books on the podcast, which is weird.
I don't know that we've had a bad one, have we?
I don't think we have. They've pretty much been bangers across the board. And not just a bad, I don't know if we've had a just decent one for the most, but most of them have been amazing.
I think that part of that is also being able to talk about a book for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
It really, though I guess not really, because we've taken
swings, stuff that we've never read. Yeah, we've taken swings on stuff that we've never read. We did Hack Slash, we did this, we did the Max, taken some swings, and they've just all turned out to be really good. Apparently, Weird and comics mix really well together. Who would have thought?
Right. If you have suggestions for books that you think are going to hit it out of the park with us, that are strange, weird, so bad they're good, I guess we can roast Latex Avenger a little bit. But I think that Dan would agree with us.
It has some cool stuff though.
As soon as I said so bad it's good, I was like, all right, Latex Avenger. But yeah, throw them in the comments. Drop a comment on our Instagram or something. We would love to have more fodder for Strange Saturdays.
Absolutely. But we've got our normal episode coming up for you this week on Wednesday, of course, and a very large back catalog of Strange Saturday Super Shows that you could go watch right now. So the playlist for Strange Saturday Super Show will be in the description. And otherwise, we'll see you next week. Comic Geeks.